Hello and welcome back. We just finished talking about mean, median, and mode to start, and the example of class marks. We found that mean versus median for large sets of data, mean is a better measure. So if you have a large amount of data, and when we're talking about a large amount of data, you're probably talking about probably 100 plus pieces of data as a rule of thumb. Whereas if you're dealing with smaller data, smaller sets of data, median is a better measure. And if you take a look at your report cards, okay, you'll notice that the report cards go with a median mark. Okay, they used to do class average, but with smaller sets of data, the mean really doesn't mean a whole lot because it can be influenced by an outlier. So if we have a student that never shows up for class, teachers have to assign a mark, and it's usually a 0 or a 39. Huge discrepancy when the rest of the class is performing higher. So that one student in a class of 20, 25, 30, that one mark really influences the overall result. Okay, so again, mean, it's great for large sets of data. Okay, small sets, median is your better measure. Okay, you can calculate both, doesn't matter for what size, but when you're talking about significance, when you're doing an analysis, mean is better for larger sets, median is better for small. Now, mode tends to only have significance for large groups of data. All right, when you have enough people or enough sets of data that you see some repetition. So that's when mode is of interest. Now, the next topic here when we're talking about measures of central tendency is weighted mean. Weighted mean allows the measures of central tendency to reflect the relative importance of a piece of data. So for example, if you're in class and you write a quiz and you do a one-page reflection, so one-page reflection, and then you have to write a 20-page essay because some English teachers are out to get you. And what you find is you can't just, they don't have equal weight, okay? You don't want a 15-minute quiz to count for the same amount as a 20-page essay because of the time factor that you put into it. That quiz, if you came in and it was a pop quiz, you didn't study for it, you didn't read the book, only read the back of the book to see what the book was about, and the 20-page essay you did tons of research for, you don't want both of those counting for the same amount. And similarly for teachers, we want to reflect the, the emphasis is on what's important. So we have what's called the weighted mean. So recall from earlier in this lesson, our mean is the sum of the data over the number of data points. So for a weighted mean, the formula still remains x bar, but now what it is, it's the sum of the weighting multiplied by x, all added up, divided by the sum of the weight. So there's another formula that you want to make its way onto your formula sheet. And you're going to ask, well, how does this work? That's what the example's for. So a teacher has collected a series of assignments and graded them. Each assignment has a different weight in terms of importance. Answer the following. So there's a series of questions here. Want to find the weighted mean and the unweighted mean as a method of comparison. C part's the comparison. Which assignment holds the most value, and explain in terms of the teacher why weighted means are important. So here's our table for the student in question. I've transferred it already into Quattro Pro, a spreadsheet program, and I said you want to use the spreadsheet when you can. Now, if you recall, the formula that we just talked about is the sum of, so right here, the weight multiplied by the mark. So we need to create a column that is the weight, so W, multiplied by our mark. So that means it's going to equal 85 multiplied by 2. So that English essay technically counts twice in your total mark. I'm going to copy that formula all the way down so that the article that we wrote only counted once. The Shakespeare thing counts twice. The essay would count 5 times overall, and the test counts 4 times. So back to that formula, we have our W times X, and sigma means sum. So we need to add those up. So going back to the spreadsheet, I want the sum of this column because I want the sum. Oops. I want the sum of this column. So now this right here is the numerator in the formula, the sum of mark multiplied by weight. We also need the sum of the weight. So sum of my weight. So there's a weight of 14 overall, and 4 parts of it counts for the test, 5 for the essay, and so on and so forth. So here, we're going to do our mean. It would equal the sum of our weight divided by our weight. And we find that the student's average is 68.57. So I'm just going to transfer these marks, 9, 60, and 14, back to the example here. So for A part, we were doing a weighting. So the mean was 960 over 14, which came out to be approximately, what was it, 68. So let's round it to 69 for them. So 69%. So therefore, weighted mean is 69%. B part, they want the unweighted mean. Unweighted mean, just find the average of the 5 things you handed in. So that means everything has the same amount of weight when being considered. So I'm going to take the marks. I'm just going to find the average of the marks. So using the spreadsheet, average of my marks, bracket, equals 73. Still returning back, x bar equals 73%. So therefore, the unweighted mean was 73%. So when we look at C part, compare parts A and B, when you look at it, how did the student do? Well, when we weighted it and gave everything the weighting that was necessary, we see the student is approximately a 69 average. If we don't take that into account, the average should be 73. So the unweighted, in this case, the unweighted, and went thick on me all of a sudden. Oh, it's magic pen, that's why. The unweighted average was much higher. Now that's that's actually random. That's not a trend. Okay, the unweighted average isn't always higher. For this situation, it was higher, and we're going to talk about that in D&E kind of sums it up for us. Okay, so the unweighted average was much higher. I mean, much is being a subjective term here. Okay, the unweighted average was much higher. So when you talk about D part, which assignments held the most value? Well, I kind of alluded to that. There were 14 assignments in total. So of that 14, the Big Bad Essay and the content test were 9 parts of the 14. So it made up for 9/14 of the mark. So we could say that the Big Bad Essay, my bias doesn't show it all, I hope, through the video here. Big Bad Essay and content test account for 9/14 of the mark. So fairly significant. Okay, well over half the mark comes from those 2 assignments right there. All right, so with the weighted mean, teachers can manipulate. We just provide 1 mark for every assignment, but we can adjust in your final mark the significance of each assignment. So when you hear teachers say, well, a lab is approximately half or a third of a test in a science class, okay, that's what they're doing. They're kind of telling you in their mind what the weighting is or how that weighting is going to be taken into account. All right. So E part. I explain in terms of the teacher why weighted means are important. Well, from my perspective as a teacher, if, like I said, if it's something that's quick, so like a newspaper article, for example, is something that would be maybe spur of the moment. It's, okay, here's a really neat current event. Let's talk about it and let's tie it into the class. Is it going to be as big as my content test or my big bad essay? No, probably not, because the newspaper article is probably a, hey, read it, give me your reflection, talk about it. There's not a whole lot of preparation. You're not using more concepts in the class. So in terms of the teacher, why is it important? Well, it allows us to provide emphasis on more important details. So it allows the teacher to provide emphasis on assignments that require more skills or expectations from class. Okay, so it allows us to do that emphasis, say this is definitely worth more because, hey, when you write an essay, you need to be able to set up a thesis, you need to do some research, you need to do some planning, you need to get some peer editing, you need to do this and this and this, and the list goes on of stuff and skills that you've learned in class. Whereas with the newspaper article, it's like, hey, here's something kind of neat, guys. It kind of applies to us. It's just an opinion piece. You know, write a letter to the editor. Well, a letter to the editor isn't meant to take 3 or 4 weeks, and it's not incorporating as many concepts. So it allows us to put emphasis on certain topics. I have one last example that we need to go through, and it deals with the intervals that we talked about in an earlier lesson and how to deal with when data is in interval form. We'll talk to you then.